All right, folks, welcome back. We're rejoined by the panel, Peter Morici and Seton Motley. And Seton, I want to pick up where we left off with you. We were talking about a story, experts warning civilians that the civilian world is not ready for, God forbid, a massive EMP-caused blackout. And I maintain that, any kind of massive caused blackout that lasts for an extended length of time, whether it's EMP-induced or cyber attacked or a physical attack on power stations, as we've seen throughout the country at various times here, whether they're practice runs or not. We're not ready. We're not prepared as a nation.
No, of course, I'd say, Peter, colleges issue a lot of bogus degrees without being hacked. Any program that ends in the word studies, for instance.
Now, is that a shot at Peter or universities?
Boy, I really like that. Just you go on, fella. Don't worry. I'll find a way to thank you later on.
One of the books I'm going to write is College is for Dummies, but that's an entirely separate issue.
Oh, man.
My comparison I'd like to draw is the electric grid infrastructure is run and paid for by government versus the internet infrastructure, which is run and paid for by private investment. In which do you have more confidence, should an attack occur, that it will resist the attack and remain upright afterwards? The government-run electric grid or the privately run internet grid? I would argue very clearly that the private-run internet grid is a whole lot more secure than the government one. And you constantly hear from the people who've been running the grid for 50 or 60 years that it needs tons of attention and tons of investment and needs to be updated, and it's woefully out of date. Well, that's your fault. You've been running it and not investing in it. The private sector internet, meanwhile, has grown into a free speech, free market Xanadu in 12 years. I would argue that the best protection of our electrical grid is to get it out of the government's hands and privatize it.
Peter, Trent Franks is almost the lone congressman who has been sounding this alarm and talking about, although I know that there are other people now, former directors of the CIA and others, who are trying to educate the public and sound the alarm that we are so vulnerable. And there are other countries who have protected themselves from possible EMP attacks on their grids. We have not. And we're an open invitation with a welcome sign for anybody who would try something. And I went through Sandy living in New Jersey, and we were without power for 8 days and 8 nights. Now, I'll tell you, across the street, the Italian restaurant was open, and no roaches, by the way. So it wasn't a real blackout. But when you lose everything, it's a whole nother world.
Well, absolutely. Before, I was referring to the backup systems that businesses and universities have to maintain power. But do you remember the big blackout in 1964 or 65?
I do. People got stuck on the subways in New York City. I was working at a
drugstore that evening when the power went out, and we had to go home, and it didn't come back for, what, a day or something?
Yeah.
But in those days, we weren't dependent on technology the way we are now. And the telephones continued to work because they always seem to have enough power for the phones. That has some kind of backup system. But that was our internet in those days. So, we are really vulnerable in that sense that we won't be able to keep society going. Although I have to say this, given how often I lose my internet connection because of Comcast, please don't tell me I should feel more confident because the private sector is running the internet the way Cox and Comcast do business. I'm sorry, that's not giving me a lot of confidence right now that either system isn't quite vulnerable.
Well, I would argue that Comcast does or Cox or whomever does a whole lot better job than the government does on the main in delivering goods and services.
That's true, but the internet breaks down a heck of a lot. And
but there's a whole lot of government involved in the internet too. I mean,
well, the last mile doesn't have a lot of government, and it's breaking down all the time.
No, actually, it does. The last mile has a ton of government. They have to pay a pole attachment fee once a month per telephone pole they connect to. They have to pay right-of-ways fees. It sometimes doubles the cost of build-out in an area is because of the. I'm sorry, guys. It doubles the cost of build-out because of the government fees. So yeah, government's involved in the last mile to a great degree.
Well, the private sector. if you run a
Go ahead,
pipeline
Peter.
across Farmer Gray's land, he's going to get a fee as well. So, I mean, we have those kinds of issues.
Well,
but we are vulnerable.
again,
The question is,
if the private property is one thing, government property where Comcast is, or whomever is already paying a ton of taxes anyway, to then hit them up again for right-of-way fees and per pole attachment fees is a little redundant.
okay. Well, the real issue here is not that. The real issue is, why can't we get organized as a society? And I suggest that, you know, President Obama has put a lot of his effort and attention and energy into things like extending chips, extending Medicaid, extending taxing people who have means in Medicare, in the website and so forth. It's just not where this administration's priorities are. It's like, why can we not deal with, quote, a regional power in Europe that is making our allies nervous and basically, you know, running a covert war in the Ukraine? The answer is this
Well,
guy's
guys, we'll get those questions. Will have to be Seton. Those questions will have to be addressed at the next Malzberg panel summit with Seton Motley and Peter Morici. I thank both of you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. We'll see you in a little while. And James Taranto, Wall Street Journal, coming up next. Don't go away.
We don't just talk about the news, we talk to those making news. This is the Steve Malzberg Show.